Welcome to the Medical Device Made Easy podcast. Here is Munir Alazouzi from easymedicaldevice.com. And today we'll try to help you to understand how clinical investigation or PMCF data collection is working, because it's something that we have some changes, if I can say, on this area. Maybe it's good also that you know what are the new tools or new things that are existing there. And for that, I have with me Jon Bergsteinsson, which is the VP of Global Business Development at SmartReal. Jon, welcome to the Medical Device Made Easy podcast.
Thanks, Munir. Always a pleasure. Like you said, I'm leading the business development at SmartReal, but I've been doing this for a little bit more than a decade now. I've been living and breathing clinical informatics, clinical data since around 2009. And for the past 8 years, I've been dedicating my career in assisting medical device manufacturers, gathering clinical evidence and clinical data out in the market. So I'm happy to be here today and to get a chance to share some of my insight and experience with the rest of the industry.
Yeah, I think it will be really interesting because I have myself a lot of people that are contacting me related to some clinical investigation to be done or PMCF to be done, etc. And they have also the question, how can we do that? How is it working? And the objective of this episode is mainly to explain how this can be done for small businesses, for big businesses, for anybody, and how we can do it maybe more easily than how it was done before. So mainly this is the point of today. And
exactly.
The idea first, maybe to just jump in directly to the topic, I want to ask you, as you were on the business since a long time, what was the progress, if I can say, from some years ago until now about this clinical data collection? So because I remember at my time, it was more like you have to hire some clinical people that are going to hospitals to then get some Excel files or write that on papers, or I don't know what to do. And now it's completely changed. So what is your view on that? What is the progress that you saw on that?
So it's an interesting question, because since the 80s or something around the 80s, pharmaceutical companies have been using digital data collection tools to simplify the whole clinical trial data collection. However, because the regulatory frameworks within the MedTech industry have enabled companies to, somewhat bypass that requirement in terms of clinical data collection, we haven't really seen a lot of medical device companies until in the last maybe 10 years or so collecting a lot of data. And with the introduction of the MDR, when it was first drafted back in 2012-13, we saw already there that there was going to be a huge increase in terms of focus on that area. So until that time point, most of the companies, at least from what I've seen and what I've heard from people in industry, were either collecting data using Excel or paper-based methods.
Okay.
And sometimes you had sales reps going out to hospitals, interviewing physicians, asking them about how the procedure went, maybe leaving 10, 15 empty questionnaires at their table and asking them to complete them if they get a chance. And then they would maybe come back, maybe a couple of months later and collect those questionnaires. So that would be kind of like the real world evidence or post-market surveillance evidence collection back in the days. Well, actually, not back in the days. I know of a case that was, where a company was doing this just 1 year ago.
Yeah.
So the changes that we're seeing from that to now is definitely being influenced by the MDR, placing higher restrictions on that requirement, and also COVID-19. Companies are now seeing the fact that, paper, traveling to sites, collecting data is not really feasible when you're not allowed to travel.
So I think the COVID-19 helped a lot for the digital business, not only for clinical data collection, but for a lot of other topics, if I can say. Just the fact to have those visual meeting, like a Teams meeting or whatever, it was like something that you had to have a meeting in a room. Now you can have a meeting with everybody everywhere in the world. It's normal. It's not like difficult for people. Now, those things about visiting hospitals, getting data, discussing with people, having those meetings, etc., with COVID-19 was more restricted. And I think the digital software or tools were really then popular at that time, so that they can continue what they were doing without stopping, if I can say, because of this pandemic.
But those medical device companies that have collected data in the past because of their high risk classes or interest in R&D or just basically for market access, they had done so in many different ways. Creating Excel sheets, databases from the scratch, and so on and so. But what's changing that and what's driving digitalization within this part of the industry is the fact that regulators within the industry, such as competent authorities, notified bodies, and so on, and the standards for and around clinical investigations and clinical data collection post-market settings are requesting manufacturers now to start collecting data in a more validated, future-proof way. So traceability and validity of data is kept in order because that can be very difficult to document and achieve using an Excel sheet, for example.
Yeah, you can make easily a mistake with this Excel sheet. So instead of 10.2, you make a 1.02. So just because you misread the information or you push the wrong button or whatever, and this can change completely the view of the result here. So I think the validation of software, of documents, of things is really something important, can help that. So, but is it so now getting more and more popular with some industries to go to this digitalization?
So the bigger companies have definitely been leading the way, because surely they have the funds and the budgets to digitalize this area of their business. And many of the larger scale MedTech companies, which are often highlighted as pharmaceutical companies as well, J&J, Medtronic, Philips, all those, they've been doing similar, data collection in a digital manner as the pharmaceuticals for years because they had the budgets. But the fact is that 97% of the medtech industry are small, medium enterprises. Only 3% are, J&J, Medtronic, all of those.
Yeah.
And 97% don't have or haven't had the same chances as the larger ones because there hasn't really been a suitable approach for them or tool available to enable that. So you could say that the larger companies are definitely leading the way in terms of that, but there are more and more smaller companies now getting onto it, understanding the importance of it. And I guess it's all because of experts like yourself that dig into this part of the industry, that realize that, well, this standard actually, for example, the new ISO 14155 states that you need to use a validated tool to collect your data. So that's forcing basically everybody.
So it's disqualifying the Excel files, I suppose.
Yeah, that's basically what's happening.
Okay.
And this only happened last July, like last year, 2020. That was when the new published standard came out, which actually clarified a little bit further what they actually meant with a data collection tool that is verified and validated. So those are definitely the two things that are impacting the change right now. So
we know that, for example, in the US, we talk a lot about real world data, about all those things. So is this something that is, what is it? What is the difference here? Is there many differences in terms of collection of data? So do we have many methodologies to do that, or it's exactly the same? It's just a vocabulary change here.
It's a fantastic question because, and I laughed when you say real world data or real world evidence, because it's just another buzzword.
Okay.
When we say clinical data, it's clinical data. It's evidence to show that a device is performing as effective or safe as you thought it is. And clinical data, it can be collected or be represented in different ways. And there are multiple ways to collect that. And now when service providers are marketing themselves towards being able to provide real world evidence, what they're basically saying is that we can go out to sites or clinical sites or hospitals, help you gather the relevant data, and then use that for your regulatory approvals. there's no like real world evidence tools, real world evidence data collection. There's no like one tool or one way of doing that. It's just a terminology on data that's out there in the real world.
So it's just go and collect the information that are really happening with real people, and then getting that to be placed on those data. So we have, as we said about the small and big businesses. So we have sometimes people that are hired, if I can say, to go to get those data. And now we are talking about digitalization. So does it mean that digitalization is more like we are not visiting the hospital at all and we are just communicating through a tool?
Yeah, well, there are different aspects to this. First of all, there are different methods in collecting data, and deciding on which method suits your goal is also depending on what you're trying to accomplish. Are you trying to accomplish a market access? That is, do you need to gather some data for regulatory approvals? Second of all, what kind of device do you have in terms of classification and safety? What information would be required for a device of that class to prove or show efficacy or safety, and what kind of data is needed for that kind of device? And depending on that, you have different approaches to what data and how you collect it. And there are ways to conduct clinical investigations that have been, marketed by a lot of service providers in the industry now as decentralized investigations or decentralized trials. But there are also, ways to get the data in different means, such as through surveys or questionnaires of some kind. And all of these methods and terminologies, of course, can be understood differently depending on where you are in the world. But most of the time, we're just talking about a patient that has had a treatment with a device and a clinician that has chosen to use the device or implemented it in one or another way. And no matter what kind of method or activity you're going to be using to gather those data, these two actors are the main actors you'd probably be interested in gathering data from in terms of clinical evidence of safety. But the way that you do that can be very different from one device to another. And it's definitely becoming more popular for companies to start looking towards the new trend of remote data capture, decentralized trial, digital data capture. But remote data capture, decentralized trials, and whatever that might mean in terms of device investigations, it's actually been there for quite some time.
Yeah.
Medical device companies have been doing post-market clinical studies, especially for implantable devices, for years. And in many of those cases, they've been sending out questionnaires to people at their home, which then answer them and getting them, and then they get them back to the hospital where they can then collect them and review them. That is somewhat of a decentralized trial, a hybrid kind of a setup where you don't need to have the patient coming into the hospital. So it's nothing new. It's just becoming more popular, I guess, and there are more tools and more services being provided now to support that kind of setup.
So if we go more in the concrete, if I can say, steps. So I want to set up a clinical investigation with maybe 2 or 3 centers. So I want to use this remote tool. So mainly I set up that in the remote tool that to have 3 centers. There is practitioners, and they are all, and we are all connected through the tool to collect the data and to fill all the information. Yeah. Is it the way it's working?
So are you thinking about the definition of like a decentralized investigation, or more about the planning of it?
Yeah, the idea is how practically we can, if I can say, set up something like a digital tool that can help us to gather data between us, me, for example, that I'm in my office, and maybe some hospitals with some practitioners that are seeing the patients, getting the information, and then what should they do with this information? Should they place that on the tool? And then I'm receiving that immediately. So what is exactly the kind of more practical way for that?
So one of the ways of doing, to accomplish this would be to have a data capture solution which enables users from the different sites to enter data and information into like a centralized platform, which is then managed by the sponsor or a service provider in some way. And the traditional way, the most effective way of doing so would be to have some kind of a centralized setup where you, as a manufacturer, set everything up according to your protocol, and then you give people at these different sites access to the solution. And then if you'd like to go one step further by having patients as well out there in the clinics as well, provide their information, those kind of solutions can then also support that in interaction by automatically sending out questionnaires or SMS events to the subjects themselves, who then can respond to questionnaires at home, which will then also be delivered to the centralized setup, so that the manufacturer or the sponsor of the investigation sits on this gold mine of data sets coming in from different sources. And this can even be across continents, where you don't need to think about traveling a data capture and transcription of data from paper. You don't have to think about patients coming into visits. That is, if the device allows you to have the patient just stay away. And then thirdly, you don't have to worry about travel costs as much, because first of all, you can do remote monitoring. Second of all, if on-site monitoring and quality assurance of the data is required, it wouldn't need to be done as often as you would have to do it if it was only data available at the sites, which had to be fetched every time.
I think I find it really amazing that, we can really include all the stakeholders in one tool, that then it's avoiding, as you said, all those costs that are related to travel, or to maybe hire multiple people to do the visits and this and that. So I think it's working good in that way. The other thing that I was thinking is the fact that here we talk about a manufacturer that want to do that, but I know also some manufacturers that say, I'm not an expert on all this. Can I hire a CRO for doing that? So is this approach also compatible with the CRO organization that are managing all those clinical investigations?
Yes. So there's a lot of CROs out there that have their own preferred solutions or way of doing things. So there are some CROs that have either built their own solutions and then are providing it as a part of the services, or there are CROs that work with multiple service providers like SmartTrial in offering this kind of service. What I'm seeing right now is, because of the lack of clinical experts within the MedTech industry. So before the MDR, there was a sufficient number of clinical experts, but now because the focus on clinical data is becoming so important, manufacturers are hiring clinical experts like crazy, and there's a shortage of them. So not every single manufacturer can plan and execute their clinical investigation from A to Z today. So what we're seeing is that there are new CROs popping up around Europe and also in the US, who have maybe doing a lot of regulatory work for medical devices, but now they're seeing a chance to start supporting their clients as well within the clinical area. So manufacturers are definitely hiring CROs or regulatory companies that are turning into CROs to assist them with this planning and execution. And that's definitely possible to do with these solution providers, because the CROs are usually only focusing on setting it up, maintaining, and planning, so the execution will be flawless. And this can either be done with a CRO or without.
Yeah, I suppose that mainly some companies are using CROs, but some companies are doing that by themselves. Do you see maybe a proportion like big companies are doing that by themselves and small are using CRO, or it's really a mix for everyone?
It's if you'd asked me 3 years ago, I'd probably tell you that it's usually just the medium, larger enterprises that are hiring CROs. Okay. Now, the picture is completely changed. Okay. The pages has turned, and I'm seeing all sorts of companies of all sizes and types hiring consultancy CROs to assist them. And I guess that has a lot to do with the fact that there are more CROs out there now, MedTech focused CROs who have licensing options, service options that are more suited towards the MedTech industry. Before, If you talk to the big CROs, they take fortunes in just planning a trial.
Yeah,
they didn't really understand the specifics of a medical device trial, so they just took the same cost as they had done with pharmaceuticals and just applied it to the MedTech projects, which is why they never won them, which is why they never used them unless you had the money.
I confirm that.
That's what's changing now. The regulatory experts that know that are now providing service options that are suitable and possible for medical device companies to buy.
No, I think it's clear, and I have also this experience where I have a lot of manufacturers that said to me, "No, we will not go for a CRO because they are charging too much." And when we see that, there is small ones, and I know small ones that are really qualified and that are doing a good job, that are not charging that much, and that are really successful in their business. So this is, I think, something that is evolving. And thank you for sharing that statistic, because I think a lot of people have to understand that don't need to go to big ones. There is really small ones that are also qualified to help you in terms of that.
Definitely.
But, in terms of CRO, so I think it's also adapted to them, so to use those digital solutions, because then it helps them also to manage everything more in a centralized way. So it's not like, as I said, this is not something that is reserved for manufacturers. It's also reserved. It can be used by CROs, and I think, for me, they should use that. It's not like they have a choice here.
That's true, but there is. In Europe, there are different regulations in terms of, especially within the pharmaceutical industry, that determine whether or not you can actually be managing your own trial.
Okay.
In the pharmaceutical industry, you actually have to have a CRO doing the majority of the work, because the regulators are afraid that bias, operating bias, might affect the results of data.
True.
And I think we're probably gonna see competent authorities and ethical committees looking a little bit more towards that, as the number of clinical investigations and PMCF activities within the MedTech world will increase. There will probably be some kind of a requirement in terms of access, traceability, etc., that sponsors or medical device manufacturers will probably have to look at, which will and might end up having CROs doing more work than they've done before.
No, I completely agree with you. And you made a good point here. We talked a lot about clinical investigation, but we have also the PMCF activities that will, I suppose, grow also. So can we make just an explanation of what is the difference between a clinical investigation and a PMCF?
So a clinical investigation is just a very simple, well, not simple. It's one way of gathering clinical evidence for a medical device in a standardized way. And PMCF is an activity described in the regulation that is supposed to feed information into your clinical evaluation report to document your device's safety and performance out there in the market. So clinical investigation is an activity. PMCF is a regulatory term. However, the term PMCF, post-market clinical follow-up, has some details under it that specify that you have to specify some activities or methods to be conducted in a post-market setting on your device that will generate information on clinical effectiveness and safety, which then can be used to continue document the device's performance out there in the market. So there are companies now initiating post-market clinical investigations, which are as a PMCF activity, which are most of the time more of an observational manner. That is, they're just gathering observational data on how the device is being used in the clinic. Whereas in clinical investigations, you usually have an un-CE marked device or a new type of device or technology that's intervening with the standardized clinical workflow. You're offering something new. And because you offer something new and different, it has to be regulated in terms of how it's used.
Exactly.
So there are different requirements on how to conduct a pre-market clinical investigation versus a post-market clinical investigation.
Yeah, I think it's important to understand that when you do a PMCF, so a post-market clinical follow-up, you have to use the device as it is described on the CE certificate. So you should not create new intended purpose or new features or whatever. It's just to verify, as you've said, the efficiency, the safety of the device as you get the approval for it on the market. So there is no change. And clinical investigation is more like proving that you are your product is really fulfilling your requirements before to be CE marked. But in terms of the collection of data, for example, on clinical data, so is there a difference here, or we are really going to collect exactly on the same way?
No, if you have a device that's not CE marked or hasn't gotten approvals to go to market or isn't being sold, or you have a new novel technology or technique, the type of data you're collecting in those kind of clinical investigations is usually different in terms of there's a little bit more, there are more number of data points usually. And that's because you want to gather potential safety parameters that you think or might not think could affect the performance of the device. Whereas in PMCF, you're more thinking about parameters that you know will be able to support your device's safety and your device's performance. So if you know that you have a weight scale, which is supposed to measure weight exactly with up to 3 decimals, you should not have to collect all the data and then just the weight, and then maybe a weight from another device that's already CE marked. And then you can just ensure that we're doing good. We're weighing the same. But if you're doing a pre-market trial, you might want to collect data on, something like, did the patient hurt the feet when they, stood up on the weight scale? Yes, no. Additional questions that you think that might happen. And that's just to ensure that you gather everything if there's anything that could go wrong.
And now with the EU MDR, with the regulation, you have really to think about creating those PMCF studies if you have no justification for not doing that specifically. So I suppose there is more and more companies that will need that. As you said, there is less and less clinical expert that can help. So at a certain point, there is really the need of these digital solutions, if I can say, to help have a good organization in terms of working on those clinical data, gathering them. Is those digital solutions also kind of helping to create the report and accumulating the data, making the statistical information, etc., or is just like here is a table and then do whatever with it?
It's a little bit different from who you speak to and what you're really looking for, because statistical analysis alone on medical device clinical investigations is very complex, and there is no one-stop shop that suits all. So usually most of these data capture tools, they provide a database where you collect data in a standardized way, and then you get the data out of the database in a structured manner. You can also standardize maybe reports and dashboards that can provide, some descriptive statistics or reports that accumulate some results from your data. But when it comes down to it, you have to be able to define some kind of a statistical analysis plan in your clinical investigation, or a similar plan for your PMCF activity that applies the statistical method on the data that you want to use to prove or show something. And I'm not going to say that in the future this will not be possible to just say click and then we get a PMCF report out. I think that's feasible, but to get to that point, we need to get a little bit more experience with UDEMET.
Yeah,
you guys, it's really the UDEMET that's going to drive the output from, that has to be generated. Even though all the requirements and specifics have been laid out, it hasn't been tested yet. It's still in the works. So I'd say as soon as we get that up and running, we can start thinking about how can we maybe start interlinking the systems that generate all that data to the UDEMET, which is kind of where the output data is supposed to go into.
Yeah.
And then you might need to maybe interact with your QMS as well, and
exactly
stuff like that.
So what is interesting is that PMCF was existing, if I can say, and clinical investigation was existing before. But we have some evolution here, and now there is some new ways also to do that and to gather data. So as you said, we need also to get some experience on this, on PMCF, for example, because now it's more and more required by the regulations, and then more and more companies will be jumping on that, and maybe we'll have some kind of tendency and some understanding of that. So yeah, I agree that just having some experience first, then we have to set up those digital tools that can help us maybe to reach the end where we can just, as you said, click on a button and have everything. But yeah, I still need my job, if I can say so. Let's wait a bit for having that. We still need to be here to help, I hope. But I think it's really something interesting. Great. I think we covered a bit of all the information related to clinical data collection. As I've said, it's something that starts to be common to a lot of companies, but we have some companies that still are asking, oh, should I hire people? Should I do it? Should I do that? And the objective here is just to give them many options possible that they can use for that. So if they want to talk, maybe because as you are really knowledgeable on that and your company also, if they want to get some information about clinical data collection, so where can people can follow up with you?
I think the easiest way would just be LinkedIn. Just message me on LinkedIn, again, test me on LinkedIn. I'm always up for an open discussion on clinical data collection, and whether it's just sharing insights or delivering feedback on a PMCF plan regarding the methods to be chosen and somewhat. I'll be happy to do any assistance in that regard.
Great. So
I'm fully aware of the fact that this is a very broad topic, and we can't use the next 40 minutes on talking about this.
Exactly. Exactly.
But clinical data collection is something that all companies need to think about as soon as they get their QMS standardized, because there's a lot of aspects in your QMS that need to be in order before you start collecting any data. You've probably seen that already in your works in the past couple of years, that this is something that people often tend to leave out or forget to think about.
Yeah. Then, as I said, I will place anyway your contact details on the show notes, so you can go and check directly there the LinkedIn profile for
Sounds
Jon.
Good.
And then ask him your question directly, because I have people that are asking me questions, so I will forward that to Jon anyway. But don't hesitate to go to Jon's profile on LinkedIn, and you can get all that. Okay, so thank you for all the information. I hope it will be helpful. But I know that there will be a lot of progress related to that. So maybe we can have some more information in the future for that. But for people that are listening, if you have maybe some questions about this kind of topic, or maybe other topics about clinical, don't hesitate to send me a message at info@easymedicaldevice.com. And I will try to find somebody maybe to answer to that, or maybe Jon can come back and discuss about that with us directly. Okay, so Jon, it was really a pleasure to have you. So thank you really very much for all the information you have provided, and I wish you a nice day.
Thanks, Munir. Always a pleasure.
Thanks. Bye.
Be in touch. Bye-bye.